Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 11th episode of Inside the CFO podcast. My name is Amartya Singh. I am your host, and I'm the co founder and CEO of Inflow, a product built by and for modern finance teams. So, here in our 11th episode, we are going to explore the journeys of finance leaders, the challenges they have overcome. And today, we are joined by Gary Liu, a seasoned CFO with expertise in public company finance, strategic transformations, and operational excellence. He has led finance teams at Biomerica, Happy Money, Warp Technology, First Service Residential, and Broadcom, where he has driven strategy, compliance, and growth. He's passionate about mentorship and he has also founded Forge Optima, a network dedicated to advancing finance professionals through collaboration and learning. In today's episode, we focus on CFO leadership at public firms, strategy, scale, and AI of it. We'll explore how CFOs in public companies navigate growth, compliance, and financial scale while embracing AI and automation. So, welcome, Gary. Great to have you with
Th-
us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thanks, Gary. So I think let's dig into the podcast. Let's start with a very rudimentary question, right? You have worked across the consulting side onto the finance leadership side. So how has
hmm
your career from EY and to becoming a CFO? How has it progressed? How has it been working out for you?
Yeah, it's a great question. Very traditional starts, but as most, I would say, finance executives tell you, that it has its twists and turns, and that's kind of what grows hair on your chest and allows you to navigate choppy waters. I'm proud UCLA Bruin, economics and accounting. I did the whole kind of normal EY cycle, mentorship, internship that funnels into the full time. And one of the things that client service is great, but really was very passionate about getting into a company, really understanding the products and kind of being part of that environment. Tech, as you know, has been so prominent for so long. But back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, when I was there, it was one of the things that I wanted to make that transition. So I was very fortunate. Again, very traditional. I got a job at Broadcom. I oversaw the SOX and IT kind of audits there, and that's kind of where it really transformed. Very pivotal. I got put into a kind of corporate rotation. So obviously, your accounting, did your finance, did your product kind of specific things, and to your point, was able to kind of get more into the strategic consulting arm of the internal business and really trying to solve for more operational problems. And then the really big one that completely opened really my whole thought process, even to today, was I was charged with being the PMO of a big bang SAP implementation. I oversaw sales finance as well as the business intelligence side of the house. And I will tell you, when you're doing financial models, you're doing accounting, it's fine, but you don't really have a full appreciation, whether it be kind of the tech stack, even the data architecture elements, and how it all pipes. And more importantly, it even goes to like kind of end-to-end cycles. You learn about them, you audit them, you do all these other things. To be part of it, to basically build it piece by piece, has really helped me fundamentally, even to today, really understand kind of technology. So that was like a really big component. The rest is kind of standard. Continue to go kind of public company, mid-market, continue to rise up. And I think one of the biggest itches I had was now I've had technology enterprise, and I was kind of missing the startup element. Like I didn't know how things started. Whether you start at the triple F, friends, family, full round, all the way up to maybe Series D, right? So I really wanted to understand not only, I think, okay, I got the business, I got the product, I get all those things, but like, how does it even start? Like the idealization, like how does that, the vision? So that's kind of where I pivoted, basically kind of from a very traditional kind of road to, hey, I really want to focus on startups. And really fortunate, you mentioned Happy Money. We had basically started, I was at a lower valuation and we became a unicorn. So many things really from a discipline standpoint that really helped. And then the other component was kind of the next logical step was to take it from, let's say, a startup to something a little more mature. And in Biomerica, it's been an interesting mix, right? It's a public company, and it's probably a little bit worthwhile to explain more about it. years we've been around, 30 plus years public. So like that's kind of interesting. That's not really new or tech, right? But one of the really cool things is that they found commercialization early on. They went through a large R&D phase, and they have kind of a new product. It's called IBS, and that's something that really intrigued me because we were kind of in the commercialization phase. So it's almost like you have this core product that's been doing really well. Then you have this brand new arm that could be kind of the growth cycle and kind of the future of the company. So that's kind of what really attracted me the
Right.
opportunity. And I know kind of that's what the company was looking for as well. So it's been a good synergy.
Wow. I mean, I think the experience has been huge and immense, and it's not only about working across startups and public sector companies, but it's also about the tech aspect of it. You mentioned about the data architecture and like the confidence and the way you tell it, because I've seen finance leaders not being very confident in technology, and they typically leave it to the IT guys to figure it out. But it's really nice and fascinating to for you to talk about the data architecture, how the technology is going to work out. You implemented SAP. I believe SAP implementation is so complex, right? It's not a straightforward implementation. There is so many moving parts. I'm sure that it must have been challenging for you to face it.
Also very, very expensive. We have obviously a lot of help, right? A lot of
Right,
outside consultation because they're the experts. That's where the ERP guys make their money, the Centers of the world or whatnot. But no,
right,
absolutely. I think challenge is part of it, but you're absolutely right. I think this kind of a theme I'm sure we'll kind of get into, but I do believe from a finance standpoint, we're typically seen as the no people, the
right,
guardrails, the very conservative people. And I feel
right,
like that is a little bit of a hindrance in our current kind of environment where there's so many opportunities to leverage technology, AI. And I feel like if you just open up a little bit or try to look at maybe, hey, it's not just manual process updates or it's not going to break the system, right? Especially in
right,
the SaaS world, right?
right,
Where you have solutions that are very specific to solve for very specific problems and they can play pretty easily. So
right.
it's almost like you can try a little bit without going full SAP stack or Oracle, you know what I mean? So yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
No, great. I think the mix of technology, working at a startup vis-a-vis working at a public firm is itself, the culture changes, technology changes, expectation changes, vision changes, so many things changes. It's like a completely like you're doing finance and you're doing finance one and doing finance two, like two different sets of roles. So I think very fascinating to know that I'm as you rightly said, we'll come across multiple things during the podcast. But I think one of the biggest things that we were talking about is the public firms, right? We're talking about Biomerica,
Yes,
right? So from a Biomerica perspective, I mean, you must have faced a lot of challenges across. It might be cultural, it might be technological, it might be
sure.
vision, it might be as simple as cash flows, right? What was the biggest challenge that you faced at Biomerica, and how did you go about solving it?
That's a really great question. And I'm going to pause a little bit just to kind of give the audience kind of a little bit of setup of what it is, because that'll probably help understand it. And it's actually not necessarily a finance challenge, it's a business challenge. And I think that's where it goes back to, depending on your size of company, of course, we're a smaller company, we're a micro cap company. And, I think that's part of the role, right? Really, you have to get involved in really pushing the business, not just kind of providing some data analytics to make business decisions. You should be making the business decision. So as I mentioned earlier, Biomerica went through a large R&D cycle and we came up with a really great product. It's called InFoods IBS. It's effectively a blood food intolerance test specifically tuned to the irritable bowel syndrome kind of disease state. And it's
Wow.
very simple. Basically, you prick your finger and it tells you kind of specifically kind of what you have effectively some kind of response to. And
Right,
the interesting thing about this is in the space, medical doctors typically they follow certain medical guidelines, right?
right,
And
right,
the cool part about InFoods is it is so revolutionary that that's one of the problems. So let me kind of explain a little bit. So
right,
effectively, InFoods, when it was first kind of put through the clinical trials with FDA and was like backed by all the scientific Rome Foundation, we have Harvard, all the names, right? But Harvard, Mayo, Cleveland, and it was like, hey, look, you're telling us that it's a diagnostic that tells you what not to eat, like let's say cranberries and blueberries. Okay, just don't eat it. After 4 to 6 weeks, you'll feel a lot better, especially if you're suffering from IBS.
right,
And like, wait
right,
a second, are you telling me that the test will tell you not to eat, and if you don't eat it, it isn't just a diagnostic. We're like, what do you mean? They're like, it's a therapeutic. So it's the
right,
first diagnostic that is also a therapeutic, which completely takes the whole, it's a category creator. I should put it that
right,
way. And
right,
as a result, trying to penetrate, first, it's hard enough to make something that works, right? Step one. Step two, it's really hard for someone to buy it. And
right,
as you see, we really focused on the G space because that's where really the IBS kind of servable addressable market is, right? And when you look at the SAM there, you're like, okay, great. And most people, they don't know about it. It is brand new. So there's a lot of things associated to that, including, it's a cash pay test. And most people are
right,
used to reimbursement. And
right,
it goes back to I want to be the first one. There's all these different challenges, right? So we kind of tackled each one. First, it's like trying to understand something that's not necessarily finance, but business is like, hey, marketing personas, who are your customers? Are they willing to adopt new technology out of the guidelines? So we should start kind of understanding that, doing the research. Another part was simply clinical trial data is great, but where is the real world activity? So we
Right.
basically kind of built a platform, if you will, that tracks the patient journey. So we can have all of that for the doctors. We can also have it for ourselves. It's almost like a mini SaaS platform, right? And that goes back to being creative. That just because you're a 40-year-old company doesn't mean you can not innovating, right? And I believe
Right.
those are some of the areas that we have not fully solved for, as an example. But
Right.
because we have this cash pay revolutionary test, it's almost like a category creator. So I think those who've been in space understand that if you don't have some form of large influence, it's very hard to break in. Ours is largely, unfortunately, highly regulated too, because it is obviously a blood test. So I
Right.
think looking to all those things a lot operationally, financially, obviously, trying to really understand the difference between, let's say, R&D and what we have to do in the future and commercialization, optimizing some of those, really focusing also on the core, I would say, products prior. You cannot let that one go either, right? So it's across multiple discipline. It's almost like you have the startup side and you also have the kind of original core side, and
Right.
trying to really balance your efforts across is it's its own
Right.
challenge. But I really believe that it is one of those things where it's just going to take a little bit of elbow grease and some adoption, but this thing is it's straight fire. I love it.
No, great. I think, I mean, by the way, very innovative. I mean, I'm sure a lot of my friends will love this product who all are battling IBS because,
Yeah, just contact us. Yeah, absolutely.
it's a great product because sometimes what happens is you're going through something and you cannot actually know what is happening to you, what is that exactly food item, and you'll have to remember, you'll have to go through what you have eaten. Okay, I ate that, I ate this, but it's continuously happening to me. So a kind of a diagnostic way of understanding what is happening to you makes a lot of sense. Incredible product. But even more incredible is the way you explained it. I mean, it was not at all like a finance person. You were speaking like somebody who understands all the aspects of the product, all the aspects of user acceptance. How are you going to sell it? So loved your answer, and I'm of
And
course
if
I'm
you don't mind me interjecting, I think that that is one of the areas that we talked about, right? That's the passion. I've always wanted to follow that. But more importantly, the product is one of the biggest things we finally have is obviously direct to consumer. So now people
right,
go on the website, we have this whole telehealth kind of set up. So it's one of those things we're trying to give accessibility. And you're absolutely right. I I ate my own dog food, obviously, right? Like even though I'm not an IBS sufferer, you're still going to have your biome's going to flare up to certain things,
yeah,
right?
right,
So it's one of those incredible things where I detest. I love boba tea, and it's like, hey, you have some particulars related to milk, but even more specifically, when it was talking about black tea, it was like specific. It was like Assam. Assam specifically is kind of what is giving you kind of the issue. So it's one of those really interesting and things that it's great when the product actually works, but then when
right,
you are, I think, again, passionate about being part of the business, and more importantly, it's a good product, it can save a lot of lives. And a lot of people, to your exact point, Maria, is they use drugs. That's in the guidelines. If you have any issues, they just prescribe a drug. And
right,
ours is no longer a mask for the problem. It
right.
finds the root cause, and it's no longer kind of trial and error as well. So I think that that's one of the things that, as you know, I'm really passionate about the product.
Yeah, I mean, incredible because it's also different from what you have done in the earlier, I mean, during early part of your career working at startups, right? So that actually
Yeah,
brings down to the next piece of the questions that I have, right? So
sure.
you're right, you've worked in public companies, you've worked in startups, right?
Yeah.
Would love to know how does the finance leadership approach or the strategy or the way you go about things differ between a startup vis-a-vis a public company?
I think number one, everyone will tell you being public company is related to the heavy regulation, compliance type things you have to do. So you're kind of forced into the SEC cycle. You're forced to do
Right,
certain things, but more importantly, it is about managing your shareholders, right? There's obviously a lot of things on the line. So it makes
right,
sense why you have those things, but it does kind of require you to allocate a space that's very
right,
important space to handle those kind of rudimentary, quite honestly. It's one of those things where you just have to do it. It's part of the process. But
right,
there's the other element, IR. When you talk about investor relations, there's a lot of things you have to do. Consider your press releases, your earning calls, like all those things, I think are the value that they are looking for from the management team, right? And
right,
and trying to manage those things. And obviously, we are a micro cap, and the market has been extremely punishing. But at the same time, we do have a lot of positive things. But it goes back to that's exactly the balance. Like, how do you show? How do you do those things? So I think from a public space, the difference though is you still need to have that startup spirit, in my opinion,
Yeah.
depending on the size. Like for instance, it's not just about complying and getting the job done, right? In the startup, you have to be hands-on. You have to go beyond finance. People say strategic initiatives should still be considered. How do you grow the top line? How do you look at your products, commercialization, all those things, right? But I think
Right.
there's also less tape in the startups. So
Right.
we kind of talked about earlier, SaaS solutions. Look, if I have a problem and I don't
Right.
want to pay $1 million to solve for it, you know what? I can probably pay a monthly fee to some company that's going to solve it for me. And it's going to plug in directly into like NetSuite or
Right.
whatever it may be, right? So you
Right.
have that agility, you have the room for innovation and greenfield opportunities. And I think that
Right.
that is one of the things that are really exciting. But at the same time, in startup finance leadership, you have to also kind of ready the ship. It could be a really bumpy ride,
Right.
right? And it's
Mm.
really having to make sure that the team, the organization understands that, but also trying to mitigate some of those things. And I think that that's kind of where the approach changes, where startup, yes, you have greenfield, you have all these things, but you could be burning a lot of cash. There's a lot of things to consider, and you may not have an end road, right?
Right.
Public, there's more options, capital markets to kind of play in. So
Right.
it's kind of interesting. It's like you can be as aggressive as you want to start until you run out of cash. So you have to be really careful. And
Right.
a public side, it's like you have to be kind of careful, but you have the funds to actually innovate. So
Yeah.
it's an interesting kind of dynamic.
Lovely answer. I think it's a representation of also what you answered before, right? Within Biomerica, also, you were talking about this GI product, right? And that is kind of like you mentioned about it's a startup within an enterprise. There's a
Yep.
strong level of agency within the company to build it out. There's a lot of innovation involved in not only the product side of it, obviously, but
Yep.
also in how we're going to go ahead with the marketing aspect of it. How we're going to ensure that, how is the entire user testimonial kicking in? Users are liking it. How are you spreading that thing? A lot of things which actually you are already working. And I love the answer because you went from a startup to public for company. We spoke two three aspects, right? One is obviously the regulatory aspect, and it's also to do with you are, I mean, it's in the health side tech space, so the
Yeah.
health, it's complicated. It's not that straightforward. Nobody can
Yes.
just build something, right? You have to go through
Understood.
that levels of regulatory hurdles, and rightfully
You
so,
got
right?
it.
There's a lot of things on things. So that's one thing that is there. And even on the economic side of, or more on the financial regulatory perspective, right? So there's a lot of difference because when you are a public company, there's a lot of responsibility, there's a lot of oversight involved, right? So that's a lot of difference over there. And IR, as you rightly said, IR is one big difference, right? How you're
Yeah.
handling an investor on your cap table on as a startup vis-a-vis somebody who's working in the public side is like hell and heaven of difference. The expectations are different. The medium term or short term returns vis-a-vis long term returns. I'm sure that it's not an easy thing to handle.
No, but I love it. It goes back to being challenged, growing is one of the most important kind of components. And this will, like we mentioned earlier, this is what really allows you to get more tools, tool belt, grow some hair on your chest, and continue to really make a difference.
Right, got it. And thanks for answering the question, Gary. So, a CFO's perspective, right? There are multiple focus areas, right? You have a team, you have a CEO, you have a board, you have your fellow leaders, and
Yep.
you have your investors. You need to show growth, you need to show the vision, you need to handle the financial operations, you need to handle cash flows. Too many things to handle, right? So,
Yeah.
in your experience, what are the two key focus areas of a CFO?
Yeah, I think this one's going to be pretty straightforward. You're going to hear this from kind of every finance executive, right? Number one, you have to be strategic and also have financial stewardship with it. And it largely depends on company size as well. So obviously, I kind of talked about this earlier, right? It should not be about just creating business analytics to drive business decisions. And I think, it's one of those things where, yes, that's really important. Having a strategy, following through, and eventually it'll cascade, whether it be OKRs, MVPs, depending on kind of where you sit. But I think aligning the finance side of the house with others is also really important strategically. And from a practical standpoint, top line optimization, a lot of times people will just focus on, let's say, OpEx, right? Oh, where can we cut? Where can we do this? But really, there's so much optimization beyond pricing, honestly. There's so many things, maybe your channel, or even just look at the product itself. It may not be great. And I think the other really, really important part, obviously, is the capital management. Like people are all going to say that. But I would say the biggest one, period, for success, quite honestly, is being able to work very closely with your CEO or founder and your board, right? That
Right.
is the most important part because as you are all together making these decisions, you're strategically
Mm.
trying to navigate the ship, if you will, toward the North Star. If you have some issues there, I think that those are the areas that, you cannot even strategically be together if you can't solve for kind of having that synergy. The second one
Right.
is actually really simple, right? I think it's more operational efficiencies. So we talked about, hey, looking into the future, leveraging processes. First, maybe it's more of a manual thing, but then you should be leveraging software, like we talked about, or leveraging technology, leveraging AI, really trying to focus on data-driven decisions as well. And we
Right.
kind of talked about operationally. Look, maybe you're looking at the top line. You're just like, hey, we can change the pricing, the margins need to change. But you know what? Every transaction flows through your office. All the assumptions for forecasts flow through your office. The message you tell the street is flowing through your office. Like you should probably take some command on the operational side. Say, hey, question, could we do this a little bit better? Or like, why is it kind of the way that it is? And I think again, depending on the size of the company, definitely the smaller the company, I think the more you have to be kind of a business leader
Yeah.
and not just like a finance person.
Got it. So I think a couple of focus areas came out in your answer. One was the aspect of strategic growth and working very closely with your CEO and board, giving them the confidence, giving them the assistance and support to drive the company and to grow the company, along with the capital allocation and cash flow management. The other aspect was the operational efficiency. That's a very interesting and important point because at any stage, be it a startup or be it a public company, operational inefficiencies are bound to come in because as you scale and grow, all of a sudden what used to work at a certain stage stops working somewhere else.
Yes,
Operations do not scale
absolutely.
on their own. And that's where process improvement or applying technology to make a process better makes a lot of importance, because that's where you are actually using process alignment or technology or people alignment to do that jump between a growing company. It can be a growth in terms of revenue, it can be a growth in product, it can be just a new product or some change in business
Mhm.
dynamics. Loved your answer with regards to changing the process and absorbing technology. I think you touched upon a little bit on the ERP and finance software that run in the company, and you also touched upon the process improvement. And the segment, where we talk about the financial technology, and I've also enjoyed my discussions with you on this. Right. So would love to know what are your thoughts on how the ERPs have scaled and the financial softwares which are used in companies by the finance team.
I've been part of obviously larger implementations as well as many smaller ones, especially kind of from SAP, Nets, kind of Great Plains, the kind of list goes on. But I think this conceptually, it's two elements, right? You have ERPs are rigid, but they're also very, very large. Rigidity in terms of you also have a capital allocation problem. You can
Right.
literally develop anything you want in SAP Oracle, but it's very, very expensive. And
Right.
that's the rigidity. Like if you just want the basic plan, if you will, large unconfigured, you're going to have a real rough time, right?
Right.
And it
Right.
goes back to if you are not ready for those higher costs, if you're not ready to put in, let's say, the capital allocation to make this thing completely sing, right? You're going to have basically a lacking product. And I think that's where the SaaS solution on their side is a little bit different. This is where
Right.
it's been very interesting. I believe that before SaaS was, like I mentioned, very specific niche type of things to solve for, I would say, maybe a very specific problem. What I've
Right.
started to see now is with the development of AI and having these other elements and being able to go more end to end. It's more procure to
Right.
pay. It's not just AP, right? I think it goes back to having the technology stack kind of almost replace some of the different areas or be an integrator in some of the areas that, for instance, a very expensive or complex ERP
Right.
has kind of changed the game. It isn't just a single look, I'm going to pay you monthly a small fee to solve for this small problem. It's like, you know what? I'm going to pay you a little bit more. And I notice you can start getting to more areas, right?
Right.
So it goes back, okay, maybe you're attached to the sales funnel, not kind of flowing through, or maybe back to the procure to pay. I don't need a super large system for everything, but I don't want something that is also microcosmic, right? So I think that that is one of the cool things about technology, where as it
Right.
continues to expand, you can basically pick your niche or you grow into it and you get larger and larger. And look, I think that's probably what SAP and Oracle did, right? First, kind of
Right.
midway, then all these demands start coming on, all these customizations. What used to be development is now configuration, and then any new development may become a configuration if enough people ask for it. So, that's kind of where my kind of general thoughts are on it. But I do think, again, back to my very first point about, I think, the finance group as a whole, we're kind of conservative. And I think
Right.
being able to unlock some of that really is going to unlock a lot of value. And whether it be obviously reducing the time that your people are doing a manual process that doesn't make any sense, all the
Right.
way to, look, you can do more value add work, right? And I think that that is one of the things that without having that open mindedness and saying, well, I can't change my system because of this, or, it's good the way it is, there's always a better mousetrap, right? So I think
Right.
that is something that I hope that finance leaders adopt more of an open mindset and know that this is a
Right.
changing environment. Like we haven't even talked about AI. It goes back to like we're in a new wave now. And if you're not even adopting some of the older things in the past, I mean, you're going to be way behind.
One thing which you mentioned is that the ERPs like an SAP or Oracle or Microsoft have the solution, but deployment is super expensive. It's time taking,
Yep.
and there is a lot of efforts involved, right? To attack that particular problem statement, a SaaS company makes a lot of sense because they already have that understanding. The integrations work on top of an ERP, right? And one great value, added point was that you mentioned that they can go a little bit more expansive, provide an
Mhm.
end-to-end solutioning, which
Yep.
essentially means that you don't have to worry about going to multiple players. One company is coming in, you're trusting that player because they have done a good level of ROI for you. You can handle them more, you can make them work on more use cases and provide that kind of a value add, end-to-end value add atop an ERP, right? That makes a lot of difference to a company. And also you mentioned about the environment changing, and yeah, I'd love to talk about AI as well. But if you see, I mean, the world, the time has also changed, right? So for example, post COVID and 2021, that way technology has been adapted, or way the cash flows have become prioritized. And you must have also seen,
Yeah.
right? Today's finance leaders are co-pilots to the CEO because there is a
Yeah.
need of being in control of your finances. You're having so many companies have to revisit the hiring plans, revisit their expansion plans. And this is a strong need for the finance leaders to give that level of growth coupled balanced with a certain level of maturity, right? So that's the changing environment that we're seeing. So loved your answer in how technology needs to adapt to the changing environment.
Yeah, I'm smiling but crying on the inside. It goes back to before COVID, it was largely about growth and valuation, sky high, where you could go. And now obviously it's about path to profitability or like, look, what's your free cash flow? Like that's all
Yeah.
but you know what? It's a discipline thing. And it's
Yeah.
something that, maybe we ate too much prior to COVID and now we got to go on a diet. But,
Right.
definitely, it's something that every business, I mean, even a small business has to contend with. Like we, as larger businesses, we should not be exempt from these things, right? So it's just a repositioning.
That makes sense because I mean the world or the economy goes through its own turns. Sometimes it is bullish, sometimes it's bearish, but that's what balances things out, right? When you're bullish,
Yep.
you get to take more risks, and hence the bearish trend starts. And when you're bearish, you're too pessimistic, and that's where you need optimism to like. So that's a, I think we need those kind of balances both for public firms as well as startups,
You got it. I agree. Well
right?
said.
Great. So I think let's go to the interesting aspect of AI. As you rightly said, we both of us want to talk about AI. Everybody wants to talk about AI. So, let's talk about AI, right? I mean,
Let's do it.
uh, right? So I think if you look across the companies, right, there are sales, there is business, there's marketing, there's so many different functions, right? And the finance function, that's a huge place for AI to play a big role, primarily because if you look at the data sets, like there are so many different use cases across the CFO tech landscape. Even if you look something like a ledger entry, right? When you're making a ledger entry,
Mhm.
so tons of data, tons of positions where there's a lot of need of automations, AI automations, as well as agentic AI and multiple other applications. Would want love to know, how do you believe that AI is impacting finance and is disrupting the accounting software stack and multiple other finance software stack?
That's a great question. And it goes back to there is impact, there's disruption, but disruption typically is sometimes a good thing, right? So I think it has a bit of a negative connotation to it. But let's
Right,
use an example I said earlier about us being kind of stodgy and conservative, right?
right,
So if you have not automated your AP yet, you are like 10 years behind. It
right,
started with the OCR technology where it kind of scans things.
right,
And it basically, based on what scanned, you're able to code. But now AI
right,
is out to predictive code. It can start creating the entries, if you will, right?
right,
Workflows are even more automated. You don't have to set some of
right,
those things up. So effectively, AI has helped drive this very specific thing where it used to scan an invoice. and maybe
Right.
code for you like a
Right.
couple line items.
Right.
Now you're starting to get into, look, I get from invoice to approval, obviously someone has to do something because you don't want to rubber stamp things, but beyond that, it's almost like very little touch, right? To the batching, to the payment, right? To obviously notification to the vendor. This
Right.
whole thing is now almost wrapped up, right? Before you old technology, OCR had been around for decades. Then you put on
Right.
the AI layer. Then, like I
Right.
said earlier, if you have not adopted AP yet, I don't, it's
Right.
not even disruptive, like you're behind, right?
Right.
But then it goes back to there is a certain level of disruption now that
Right.
we're kind of in this area. I've been to kind of many roundtables and conferences as of late, and this is the number one topic. And there
Right.
is a certain level of fear about, hey, what if I put it into the robot and the robot attacks me, you know? And I think instead of looking at that of fear, again, it goes back to your perspective. You have to see where can it actually help you, right?
Right.
And I think it goes back to just like we talked about, you have an expansion of something that's very narrow that basically because of technological limits, you couldn't kind of expand further. So whether it be kind of automation, right? Maybe there's fraud detection, some predictive analysis that also exists, right? So you can
Right.
have a lot of these things kind of start your process for you. And maybe it's not
Right.
fully end to end either, but I think it's one of those things where it allows you the capacity to scale something that basically can be more automated. So you can take that time, move it into something honestly a lot more valuable. Like, and then you're going to hear that a lot, right? And I think that's where a lot of the batching, a lot of the journal entry things you had mentioned earlier, a lot of those things are starting to become way more
Right.
automated.
I think now it's kind of expanding. Went from a niche to starting to grow. And, you know, I'm kind of tired of talking about AI myself all these weeks. And are you have in the space, you have a product. I'd love to learn about kind of your journey through it and kind of what you have experienced.
I think our experience has been really great and fascinating, right? I mean, with regards to the AI/ML applications, what we've understood and begun to appreciate is that for to build any kind of agentic AI motions or solutions, the data warehousing is very important. The data needs to be warehoused for it to make sense for any ML and AI model to be built out of that. So that has been our major focus area in terms of building. But I think the journey has been really fascinating in terms of AI/ML applications, and also, there was a certain level of understanding and great answer from your side as well, right? I think, but yeah, I mean, great discussion on the AI aspect, and I see the future of AI really bright for the entire finance teams. So I think let's go to the final questions in the podcast, Gary. I think what would be your short advice for the finance professionals? How do you see them becoming somebody like you? How should they go about it?
I think the very first component is having passion and having
Right.
that drive who you are and your story. Like it is one of those things where your career trajectory has to be intentional, but it has to be led by what you love, what you're passionate about. Like if you don't have a good grounding on yourself, it's very difficult to proceed. You know, I
Right.
think a lot of people they end up going to, well, I just want to do this because money, or I want to just be something without having a plan. And I think that goes to step two, right? You have to put in the hard work. You have
Right.
to get back to the fundamentals, master the basics, because you will not be able to move forward if you can't do the simple things, right? So if you're like an FP&A professional and you're just following templates a lot and you're not building your own assumptions, or you cannot build a model from scratch, look, maybe during work it's already given to you. After work, spend the time, look into it, try to build it yourself, create, fill out the
Right.
gaps that you are trying to accomplish to bridge yourself and your personal kind of journey and your story of your passions. The
Right.
other component, which we've spent a lot of time talking about today, is you have to embrace technology and AI. Think
Right.
about all the things that took a long time to do back in the day, during emails or just even reading, right? Reading is almost a lost art. Now you can kind of short form some things, but sometimes that is helpful. You can get information very quickly. You can learn. So I would say embrace that component and stay ahead of automation trends as well, because that'll keep you current, right? And that'll
Right.
keep you relevant. And I think
Right.
the other component, you have to think beyond the numbers, right? And I think the best way to be strategic is just think of yourself as part of the business. If I owned a sandwich shop, as an example, I should know or
Right.
have a strategy on how I want to sell these sandwiches, how much they cost, who are my core people. It changes the fact that it's not always about the numbers, it's about operating your business, knowing your business, and being able to refine those elements. And I think the final thing I would say is be agile. It goes back to, as you know, you mentioned so many things that we're always juggling. There's already a big, huge sweeping change in the technology space as well. So you have to stay mentally and I would say like emotionally agile to handle some of these things. And as you continue to progress, you continue to execute against those plans, I think that you will kind of fill in your story as long as you're passionate about it. So, that's a lot of times we tell obviously our mentees. So yeah, I think
Yeah.
it works.
Great, Gary. Thanks for giving that roadmap for finance professionals to become somebody like you. Love the podcast, and we got to the end of the podcast. Thanks, Gary, for being a part of it. An audience, I hope you had a great time listening to us. There's a lot of talking points, but thanks, Gary, for sharing your journey with us.
So much fun. Thank you for having me. I
Thanks,
really
Gary.
appreciate
Thanks.
it.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.